We have noticed a great change in the students' behaviour. They feel a lot more supported. We do check-ins Monday, Wednesday, Friday every morning, first thing as a support faculty. Here they feel that they belong and they're cared for. We can resolve issues a lot quicker and students feel like they've been heard and valued.
We initially reached out to Real Schools because we wanted to address a couple of concerns within our school around consistency. Our teachers could be more consistent. They try very, very hard, but we're all selling a different message, whereas now we're all selling the same message. And I find that that has seen great value in the first 6 months.
Before, like this whole new script that the teachers sort of have been given, I think that students weren't really actually listening to what the teachers were saying. But I think now students are realizing that they really should be paying attention and that the teachers are doing it for their own good.
The teachers have changed a lot. I feel like with Real Schools helping them, they've become more consistent and there's more of a format on how they deal with students and, help them into the class, and the lessons flow a lot smoother.
The videos that Cassie produced for us were short and sharp and concise. They were to the point that allowed staff to understand what's being said, how they can implement things, and then what they could expect as an outcome from using her key points.
They used terminology that we had already implemented already. She read the room and she understood what we were doing, and she was able to then develop that in video form for us that we were able to then pick up and then run with really easily.
We constantly enjoy when she comes to visit. She's very professional. But the fact that she has all that knowledge from being there as a past principal, it really assists us because she knows what we feel like on the ground running. She knows exactly how we feel. So that really assists with everything.
The interaction with Cassie from day one has been nothing but professional, and the staff really appreciate all the time that she gives to us. Staff have come on board so quickly with this process with Real Schools because they see the value that it adds to our school in achieving success for not only staff but also for our students in the community.
We noticed after COVID that children can't regulate their emotions. For whatever reason is going on in the community, coming back and trying to interact with each other, talk with each other, solving problems, it's just not happening. So Real Schools has been able to give us the language to use and actually made us reflect on how we are in the classroom as teachers.
For the children, the biggest advantage for them is that they feel like they're heard. So they come in, they get to express how they're feeling in the morning, and I can see it impacting other areas of the curriculum too, whether it be a reading lesson and we're talking about how a character might be feeling. They're able to identify those emotions and feelings and use effective statements better as well.
I reached out to Real Schools because I had worked with Adam previously in a different setting and I just loved his approach to school culture. So that's why I got in touch, because even though we already did have quite a good school culture here, I really felt that it could be enhanced with the work with Real Schools.
I was a little skeptical at the beginning. I've done restorative practice before. The way that Cassie has interacted with us and has got us to talk about it as a group. We do our teacher circles. So we're actually talking about our feelings, how we want the day to be. It's really made us reflect on that. And so moving forward, it is going to only be positive for us and for the students that we're teaching.
I was fortunate enough to have Cassie come into my classroom and conduct an emotional circle where they're just coming from lunch. She really understood how they were feeling in order to take that into consideration for the lesson that she was going to teach. All the kids were engaged. They were captivated by her energy and how passionate she was. Even though she was a complete stranger to them, they just knew that she was there to help them.
She's a really amazing person. I like the fact that she's personable and she uses stories. She's like a normal teacher here at school. She's someone who fits in. She's got the experience and she doesn't stand out as just an instructor. She sort of blends in. I think that's one of the best things about having Cassie here at Ferncourt.
It didn't matter what question we threw at her or what scenario we gave her. She had an answer instantaneously for us, or a story of something similar that had happened that we could relate to. So yeah, Cassie was great.
In 12 months' time, I would like consistency across the school with staff in how they are managing student behaviours. They already do a fantastic job, but that is the goal, that everyone is consistent with their approach.
Being able to have the kids reflect on their behaviour and not to always want to retaliate as the first point of conflict, to be able to recognise their emotions and self-regulate and be able to remove themselves from the situation and then use those practices on their own out in the real world, not just in the classroom. And if we can teach them that, then I think we've done our job properly.
So welcome, everyone. I'm hoping at the moment that you can see me, okay, and that I didn't break the webinar by sharing a video to kick things off today. It's a bit of a sober topic, a bit of a somber topic sometimes as well, the notion of how we can lead behaviour improvement. There's a likelihood that you're joining the webinar today because things are tough. You know, things are really difficult out there in our schools at the moment. And I guess what I wanted to do was to try to open the webinar today with hope and with optimism that things can be done differently for the purpose of getting a better result, and that those results sometimes can come quite quickly when we choose to step away from the usual tram tracks that sometimes we find ourselves on in Australian schools. For the point of introduction, for the people who've not met me before, my name is Adam Voigt. I am the founder and the CEO of Real Schools. I've been a teacher since 1994. I've done 2 substantive principalships. I've spent the last 11 or so years partnering with Australian schools to try and work with them to build, to transform, to enhance, to sustain their school culture through an approach called restorative practices and through, I guess, an upgrading of those restorative principles to what we call RP 2.0. My intention today is to hopefully inform you about the possibility that you have in front of you, although we are going to take a step back first. We're going to have a little look at how we got here and hopefully resource you. I want to give you the opportunity to get your hands on some things that can give you the opportunity straight away, as I mentioned, to make some new steps that will allow you to, I guess, begin the journey to a preferred future around the way that people conduct themselves in your school community. I do want to commence by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that not only I'm presenting to you from today, but the land where you are doing your learning from today, whether you're watching the video, watching the webinar live, and I've just been able to do that thing of being able to sort of, scan myself through the list and see a couple of familiar names and a couple of unfamiliar, which is really very equally exciting. Or whether you're watching this as a video later on. It's become incredibly important to me as someone who's worked extensively with Aboriginal people to acknowledge the past, the present, and the emerging leaders and elders within our country. Chiefly because I've learned so much from the Aboriginal people that I work with, mostly in the Northern Territory. And I'm lucky to be continuing that work from Bunurong country with you today. So what I want to acknowledge first, I guess, is that, yes, started the webinar a little differently with a video. One of the other things that I'd like to acknowledge is that if you are live today, it's 4:15 or 4:23 now on the Eastern Seaboard, if that's where you happen to be joining us from. But I'm also really mindful that we had quite a number of people from WA join us today, register for for this webinar today. And my experience is that you're probably doing that thing that doesn't exist, which is called multitasking. And you've probably got other windows open on your laptop. Can I make a little clear and direct request? Close them, accept your email. Allow yourself to be really present in this and use your email in order to get the things that you need out of the webinar today. So if you do have your email open, can I suggest you open one new email now? And in the address bar, could you put info@realschools.com.au? Across the presentation today, what I'm going to do is to provide you with a number of different sort of checkpoints where you'll be able to, I'll mention a resource of some kind that you might like to get in your hands, and if you would, just pop it in the email, and then at the end of the webinar, hit send, and you'll get everything that has got your interest today. All right, so you might as well just open one email and see how you go. So the first thing I want to do, as I mentioned today, is offer resource, inform and resource. Now, as I mentioned, we've got a really high proportion of, this is probably not an unexpected phenomena, we've got a really high proportion of WA and New South Wales people joining us today. Welcome. You're part of systems that have made a declaration to do some of this restorative response in order to try to improve student conduct, behaviour, bullying, reduce suspensions, whatever the big intention is. You have system-wide, particularly at the government level, imperative around doing this work. So what we've got is a situation where even just to comply, you need to start to get your head around this restorative work. I was chatting with Angela Coggill at Bullsbrook College today, and she was saying how one of the, in WA in Perth, and she was saying one of the sort of drivers for her getting into doing this work, which she's finding a much bigger moral imperative around this work as she steps into her partnership with our WA-based expert facilitator, Candice Brown. But one of her motivating reasons for getting involved is that the writing was on the wall from a policy and procedure level that they needed to get their school good at this restorative work. So I found myself in a really interesting position when I looked at what was going on in WA when they released that policy, and then in New South Wales when they released the IER policy around inclusion, engagement and respect. Because what I saw was a gap between what principals and school leaders were being asked to do and their current capacity, knowledge level, resourcing level, and to be honest, will level in the school, that needed to be closed in order for any of these schools to do that bare minimum of being compliant. So it started with the WA imperative, and I wrote a white paper called Caught in the Implementation Gap for Western Australia, that refers specifically to the areas of policy that you'll need to close in your school in order to be compliant with various levels and types of policy in WA. And if you would like that white paper, then all you need to do in your email is make the first thing you write in there, white paper WA. Now, what we did then was we looked at what was happening in New South Wales and we adapted the white paper. And so there's a New South Wales version, again, called Caught in the Implementation Gap, that addresses the same idea, but it looks at a different policy structure. And that's the IER policy, but also there's some work that's been done around, for instance, charters around mental health and rights of the child in New South Wales that are very clear around restorative work. And I want you to be safe. I want you to, as a bare minimum, be compliant. And I think this can kind of help you take those first steps. So in that email, if you would, if you're from New South Wales today, just pop white paper New South Wales in there and we'll send that to you. Now, other states and territories, there's a pretty, sometimes you have to quote the great Australian movie, The Castle, there's a vibe out there. Regional directors in Victoria have been telling all of their principals recently that this is coming, that Victoria's schools will be restorative in nature. And as is the case with, for a lot of things, when New South Wales and Victoria gets sneezes in Australia, the rest of the country gets a cold. So I think there can be a reasonable expectation in other states and territories that this is coming for you. And if you're not in one of WA or New South Wales, but you would like to be able to get the wisdom of the white paper, then of course, just you can even put both of them down there if you like, and you'll get a little bit of the same text, but some adaptations that are locally and contextually relevant there. So that's something that's available just as a resourcing starting point for you. So let's have a little look at how we got in. How did we find ourselves in a situation where there was such a mismatch? And the mismatch that I'm talking about is between the response level that we're getting from our young people and the strategy suite that we're deploying. Okay, so there's a mismatch in that we have really wonderful intention that is backed up by some thinking that perhaps now needs to be challenged, some wisdom that perhaps now isn't as relevant as it used to be, in order for us to be able to close the gap between the way that our young people are currently responding and presenting and where we find it and the suite of strategies that we're deploying at the moment. Now, I've done some really clear, and again, like, normally when I'm running a webinar, I sort of, try as much as I possibly can to entertain, but I've been really clear and explicit that today is about informing and resourcing. Done some reasonably extensive research on this and how it is that we found ourselves in a position where that mismatch is getting wider and wider and wider. And it's chiefly due to four key mistakes that we've made as young people have evolved and changed. And that'll be the second part of the webinar today about the young people. The first one is that we fell for a mistake around knowledge transfer. So this is, and I guess to a point, all of these four mistakes are really forgivable mistakes. They don't come from a bad place. They come from the intention as educators to educate. And that's could be exemplified no more accurately than in the intention around knowledge transfer. So a lot of our work is around taking knowledge, and while I'm a proponent of highly inclusive classrooms and practices where young people are able to explore and to be able to climb the ladder of Bloom's taxonomy in their work, I'm not anti-knowledge. And a lot of the curriculum and access to those higher rungs of the taxonomy require them to have some kind of knowledge base. Yet, transferring knowledge around behavioural traits and characteristics and expectations to young people does not make them value those expectations, traits and characteristics. It doesn't make them develop those expectations, characteristics and traits. In fact, sometimes it can do the opposite. So when we speak about behaviours that are problematic to us in negative terms, what we actually do is negatively prime young people to think about those behaviours. And it's a little bit like me telling you, don't think about a pink elephant right now. I know what you're doing. Yeah. And it's a little bit like some of the flawed logic around adult behaviour change that we attempt with things like making our roads safe. I drove just the other day up Eastlink in Melbourne and saw a sign above the freeway as I drove that said, "Do not touch your phone while driving." So it's the only time I thought about my phone. So I get what you're trying to do, but unfortunately it's triggering different brain energy and activity with me that is not allowing me to think about to demonstrate the behaviour you want. And the truth, I glanced at my phone. I had a look to see whether I could get at that point that dopamine hit. Has anyone texted me? I did a completely unsafe thing. I did the exact opposite of what the sign wanted me to do, because there's no brain science sitting behind this. It's just a need being expressed. It's just them trying to get the knowledge that they have about a behaviour they want across to me. And the transfer piece is inappropriate and irrelevant when it comes to getting young people to improve their behaviour. So telling people what respect is, for instance, does not make them more respectful. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to number 4. Because in fact, I think that what we've had is many teachers who've done the respect mini lesson, and what they've done is watched a young person build a really fabulous respect poster and then wander out into the yard and bop someone over the head with a rolled up respect poster. They actually didn't get better at respect by doing that poster. They got better at poster making. And so we've got our imperatives wrong around knowledge transfer. And what this has allowed in is the deep penetration of behaviour programs into our organisations, into our schools. And those programs have allowed us to get a false sense of progress because we tick off all the behaviour all the lessons that we do, all the mini lessons. We tick off the resources that we get done, and it makes us feel that we must be getting somewhere and must be implementing. But when we look out the window and we see 2 young people walking across the oval at the end of the day, is their conduct really impacted by that? I don't think it is. And it's because we're not getting to the notion of being able to immerse them. And that's how we learn. That's how we learn, is to be immersed in a culture that kind of tilts the odds in favour of you being able to conduct yourselves differently as you walk across the oval. The test of whether the programs that lean too really heavily into knowledge transfer, the tests are reasonably simple. Number one test is that of the behaviour, for instance, matrices that a lot of schools build as an artefact of these programs, how engaged in young people in those behaviours are people. I stood in a school the other day where I'd been given their respect framework and found several behaviours that they were all apparently really aware of and teaching. And I said, what I want to do today is talk to you about behaviour 1G. There are a lot of blank looks in the room, unfortunately. So they built a wonderful framework for transferring. I can go and look it up. I can see what that behaviour is. I can teach it to young people, but their awareness while they're behaving has been reduced. That's not okay. The other test of whether this programmatized knowledge transfer piece is working for us is it's just undoubtedly whether any of the programs that we actually deployed a few years ago are still being run, and they're not. If you think about the behaviour programs that were being deployed in Australian schools 8 to 10 years ago, where are they? You can get a short-term improvement out of it, but because the improvements aren't sustainable, and because the effort required to sustain improvement goes up, not down, we eventually abandon them in schools, and we need to pick a new one. And I want to encourage you, stop picking a new one. It's time to not pick a new program, because we know that the benefit that we can get is going to be short-term. The second mistake we make is around control bias, which means that what we're looking to do in Australian schools, unfortunately, is to control young people's behaviour through the prevalence and adding of rules and expectations. And the control bias is a methodology through which you can improve behaviour, but it's an incredibly high exertion methodology. What I mean by that is, if you think about a sport like Australian rules football, when it was invented, it had 10 rules and no umpires. Okay, but these days there are something like 9 or 10 umpires that attend a top level game of Australian rules, because there's so many rules in the rule book. You know, to enforce higher levels of control, we need higher levels of supervision, of which we don't have. Teachers are hard to get at the moment, and it's very difficult to supervise people into doing the right thing. We need to start to change the way that young people are growing, so we can impact the will that they have to behave differently. The third thing that's got in the way for us is skewed or incorrect beliefs about the way the world works. I have a lot of people tell me, for instance, that punishments and consequences and consistency around those is really important. I actually disagree. I think that punishment and consequences need to be applied consistently. The process for determining whether one's appropriate or not needs to be applied consistently in schools. But I don't think that a punch is a punch. I don't think that a level 3 behaviour is a level 3 behaviour. And when teachers come to me and say, for instance, that, well, there needs to be a consequence for this behaviour, I try as much as I can to step into a respectful conversation around that and ask them, well, what makes you say that? And they tend to say, because that's the way the real world works. And I ask them, when was the last time that they were fined or lost their licence for not changing lanes? For changing lanes without indicating. And most of us haven't been, but it doesn't mean we haven't demonstrated the behaviour. The research on this is that most of us with a really sound moral conscience, and I'm going to lean in the idea that a bunch of school leaders in a webinar have got a pretty sound moral conscience. Most of us are doing the right, most of us for all of the things that we do wrong, that are immoral or illegal. So illegal would be changing lanes without indicating. Immoral would be flipping the bird to someone after you've changed lanes illegally. Most of us for that, for about somewhere between 90 and 95% of the time, there's no consequence. Yet most of you are wandering the earth doing the right thing. And the question is not, can we apply a consequence every time somebody fails? Because that's not the way the real world works. It's about how can we build young people who don't flip the bird at the driver behind them, but actually put a hand up, say, sorry about that. How could we get to work on that? That's a conversation that we need to be ready for in our schools. And the fourth mistake we've made is around values implementation, which means that we have outsourced the notion of installing values in young people in the same way that other industries and other companies have tried to convince people that they're doing something that they're not. So the question I'm often asking people around values is, 30 years ago in schools, did we have values espoused? Did we have murals about them? Did we have them on our letterheads? And for most of us, the answer to that is no. My school, where I grew up, didn't espouse any values, but I think we picked them up there. I think they helped to install those values in us, despite the fact that they weren't on walls or we didn't have many lessons about them. The first organisations to decide they needed to tell us what their values were big oil and big tobacco. And they had zero intention of changing their conduct. It was about marketing. It was about convincing people that they were doing something that they aren't. And we have to be really honest. We can have as is the most common value in Australian schools, respect. Yet when I sit with a group of educators and ask them, do they think we've got an issue with respect in Australian schools? They put their hand up and say yes. So one, this notion of formalising our values isn't working. Two, we've created an unfortunate situation for ourselves where we've convinced ourselves that, that by teaching these values formally, that we're somehow having some sort of impact on young people in any kind of tangible way. Because if you think about it, is one school who tells the world that they're respectful compared to another just down the road, who doesn't? Is that school really more respectful than the other? And I'd suggest they're not. So we've led ourselves astray in these four key ways, and it leads us to kind of move, like I said, that suite of strategies in one direction while our young people are moving in the other. And that leads me to the second really important point today, which is to actually know the young people that we're looking to work with, to actually stop and ask ourselves, what are we up against here? And I want to make a little recommendation to you, if I may, today, a little book recommendation. I've been actually accessing this one by audiobook. It's a really clever and insightful fellow called Tim Urban, who's written this book called What's Our Problem? And it's a really good look at what's happening to us as people. The backdrop of it is that icky, horrible, dark, disgusting place of American politics or American society and what's going on there. Urban does a really valuable, walks us through a really valuable exercise though, where he says that if we were to take the history of humankind, and I guess the most, the estimates around where humans in some form or other have been on the planet goes back a couple of 100,000 years. And he said, if we made that a 1,000-page book, that worked chronologically, that said, okay, this is the first 10,000 years, this chapter's the second 10,000. He says there'd be very, very little happening on the first 990 pages. Things stayed very similar. You could look at what was going on page 600 and then what was going on page 800, and you wouldn't be shocked. Oh yeah, things have changed a little bit, and along that period of time. But if you were to read page 998, 999, you would freak out. And in fact, if you were to read the top of page 999, you would freak out at what's at the bottom of page 999. The rate of change in our society that has happened over the last 100 years or so is alarming. And it really has led me to think how it is that our young people are, and I think sometimes we fall into the trap of saying kids are kids. Our kids now are not. They're completely different. And even if you only look at one of the factors upon them, which is technology. So what are we up against here? We're up against young people who are rapidly changing, okay, who are growing in a rapidly changing environment. And even the access of technology to them is changing them immeasurably. And we're seeing it in our schools in terms of young people who are a little bit more commercial, a little bit more self-centered, a little bit more what's in it for me, a little bit more combative in the way that they operate. And most of this is due to an incredible change in the way that they're accessing technology, and one that we're scrambling to keep up with. So we need to be aware that our young people are growing in a period of time that is changing more rapidly than any in history. And we also need to be aware that the next generation coming through will be even more impacted, because the rate of change in our society is not slowing down. Page 1001 is going to be unimaginably different to page 1000 in Urban's Book of Human History. And we need to get ready. The reason number two that the young people are different these days is because of the presence of anxiety. This isn't to say that every young person has anxiety issues or some sort of diagnosable disorder, but there is undoubtedly, for me, a lot of latent community anxiety out there, and young people are needing the remedy to anxiety that presents in young people who don't have a diagnosable disorder. That remedy is a plan. They need to know that there's a plan for the way that we're going to treat each other when they walk through the gates of your school. it is unhelpful to young people who are anxious to have pockets of different types of practice all the way around your school. And it creates for you unmanageable transitions as they move from different classes or in a primary school from different year levels to year level. The anxiety piece needs to drop out, and it needs to drop out in such a way that we can be really clear as school leaders with our entire communities that we have a really clear, I suggest, plan on a page. There's a conversation that happens in every Australian school around getting everyone on the same page. My contention is we should write that page. We should put everything on a page that says this is how we're going to treat each other, and we should help people understand it because it drops away a lot of the anxiety. The third is a goes without saying element, which is the increase in neurodiversity, and not just neurodiversity, but I guess socio and economic diversity that's happening in our families, which means that we can no longer teach with confidence to the midpoint. And it means that valuable teaching strategies such as the ability to differentiate become more and more difficult to deploy because of the diversity in our classrooms. And the fourth one is about the condition of us. We have a significant teacher workforce crisis on our hands. We have overwhelmed educators and good ones who are beneath their best because their well-being is being compromised by their own workplace, such that some of them are on the way out, and we're finding them really hard to replace. So we're going to need to be able to find a way of allowing the people who are well-minded and well-hearted about being educators to find a practice framework that lights them up. We're going to have to find a way that we can help them feel that they're actually getting somewhere, and not just because they got through the list of mini lessons, but that young people are starting to grow the qualities that they got into the profession to grow in young people. Which leads us to this notion next about what is it that we actually need. Now, I'm a big believer in drawing a distinction between support and rescue. I believe that very few situations in life are life and death. And I believe that it's probably your experience as well, that there are too many young people out there who seek rescue from any challenge and difficulty in your classrooms when all they really needed was a little bit of support, and they've habitualized the act of seeking rescue. But I am going to say this about where our workforce and our education system is in Australia. I think there's a need for rescue. I think that we're drowning. I think that as that gap widens between our suite of strategies and what our students present as, I think we get deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think that it's time to put our hand up and be willing to allow something to pull us out. What pulls us out is a new model. So it means we need to view our job as being able to allow an explicit practice framework, a suite of strategies, to be better suited to the young people in the way that they present. It needs to reflect that what we need to do is to build culture as a driver of conduct. It means that what our job is to do is to not control young people's conduct, but to create environments where it's kind of easy for them to demonstrate the behaviours that we wish them to show. And it's a little difficult. There's a little bit more effort involved in them being able to demonstrate behaviours that we'd rather not see in our environment. This is an education design imperative that we have on our hands. When young people become really fabulous swimmers, their coaches tell them to put their alarm clock on the other side of the bedroom. And it's because they're going to make them wake up at stupid o'clock and be in a pool at 4:45 in the morning, swimming laps before they go to school. So they're going to have to get up at 4:10 in the morning. And if you wake up at 4:10 and that snooze button is within arm's reach, it's getting hit. So we have to design for a different behavioural response. And then we have to leave it up to the individual, because it's true. You could get up, walk across the room, touch that snooze button and go straight back to bed, but you're less likely to. And our job is not to get hung up on the outcome of whether a young person makes a good choice or not, but to put a design in place that makes it easy for them to do the good thing and hard for them to do the tough thing. The second thing we need to do is to understand that the primary drivers of culture are not our rules, they're not our expectations, and they're not our consequences. They are our language. And if you want to know something, for instance, about a family that's in your school, let's say you've got a young person who's on your mind today, who's hard work. Most of us would say that if we're able to kind of fly on the wall in their home for 3 or 4 minutes, you'd probably learn some valuable stuff. And what you would be doing if you were that fly is you would be paying attention to the way that people speak, and you would be paying attention to how they say those words, because that would tell you everything you need to know about the culture. Language is the most significant impactor of culture. So if you came today wondering, can I transform my culture by implementing this, a certain way of working, I would say good luck to you, but not if you're not prepared to change the way that people speak in your school. Okay, not if you're prepared to change the way they speak in every moment outside the Wednesday afternoon mini lesson. Can you change your culture? Language, as was taught to me by some Aboriginal elders in Central Australia, is culture. Culture is language. And you will not find a cultural approach that tells you the truth about changing culture if it doesn't attend to speaking differently. In our model, we speak to effective language, we speak to stakeholder protection, we speak to positive priming rather than negative like the sign on EastLink, and we speak to stored responses for the moments that get us off track in schools. And we're finding our teachers are really appreciating the low investment that they need to make in changing their language, the high return they get when they start to not be victims of their own language in the school, their own language habits in the school. We need to change the way we conduct each other, which chiefly is around the way we do our two big imperatives. One is the way that we approach conflict and wrongdoing in the school. In our model, we suggest a past, present, future rather than a past-based approach, which is geared in launching an episode of Education CSI every time something goes wrong. We suggest moving the situation forward more nimbly, more quickly, and get a result that's a positive, but perhaps not the positive that we had in mind. We are unattached from the outcome. We also suggest from a conduct perspective that we start to use the benefits of circle architecture, which has been a part of successful connective cultures for millennia, and can be really valuable for getting our teachers off the stage and getting them back into a position where they're authoritative forces in their classrooms rather than authoritarian. And as it points out in number 2 there, we actually want them to be the cultural chiefs. We want them to be driving the culture because they speak differently, they conduct themselves differently, and they think differently. So we're going to challenge some of those mindsets that I've mentioned today around that we have to be obsessed with outcomes, that there has to be a consequence. And we're going to say, actually, what does the brain science reflect about environments that encourage people to do the right thing? And that means we're going to step away from some of these programmatized hypotheses. And that's what they are. And unfortunately, the hypothesis that comes when an edu business, let's be honest, like mine, or a think tank within a department of education somewhere decides to come up with another behaviour program or resource, the hypothesis, unfortunately, is not that it will change the way that young people grow in your school. The hypothesis is that you'll use it. And I think that's a hypothesis that we should challenge and, if not, reject. What we need is skills. What we need is tactic. What we need is language, conduct, and mindset that reflects relevant brain science about the way that young people grow in order to become the person who waves rather than flips the bird at the person that they wrong. That's what we need to get up to. Now, there's a couple of things I'd like to do to be able to give you a hand with that. And this is one that you might like to add to your email. Really soon, I'll be hitting the road. I'm going to head all around Australia. I'm going to get this wrong right now, but I'll try and picture the map in my head. In Queensland, I'm going to Cairns and Brisbane. I'm going to Sydney. I'm going to Canberra. I'm going to do workshops in Melbourne, where I'm from, doing Adelaide, doing Perth. Later in the year, we're going to do Darwin, and we think Hobart. And what we think we can get to, nearly everyone. If you would like the details that are being presented by the really casual opal male fashion kind of dude that's on the screen next to my head right now, on those workshops, then just put in your email, just put the word workshops in the state you're in, and we'll get you the info that you're looking for. We're going to be running 2 workshops. The first one is a full day for teachers on restorative classrooms, strong classrooms, where I'm going to take that methodology that I spoke about before called RP 2.0, and it's unpacked in this book. I'll talk more about that in just a minute, and kind of cram it into a day and give people the crash course. The second day that I'll be in each of these locations is I'm going to run a 4-hour seminar for school leaders. and it's on the art of school culture leadership. You'll notice that what I'm talking about today is, while I'm trying to help with some structure around numbers and 1, 2, 3, 4, remember these 1, 2, 3, 4 things. I actually want to acknowledge that working culturally is not quite so scientific and not quite so straightforward. That there is an art involved in working leading culturally, and it is about painting a different landscape, a different culture, a different context for your school, so that people respond differently when they're in that picture. And I'm going to spend some time workshopping that through in a way that you'll leave that workshop with with a bit of an action plan, a bit of a paint by numbers that you might be able to go back to school and fill in some of the blank pieces in your artwork. And I'd love to meet you there. The other thing, as I mentioned just a moment ago, that I'm really happy to do for you is provide this book for you. So it's called Restoring Teaching. Two big ambitions is to teach your people the restorative framework that I mentioned, but it's also about restoring the esteem and the respect for our Australian teachers that I think is unfortunately lacking and waning. As I mentioned, we make it free. The only thing we ask for is that you cover the postage and handling. And so if you would like either a free book for yourself, or if you would like to do a bit of a bulk order for your school, my team are more than happy to make that arrangement for you. All you need to do in the email that you've got open is on the next line, put RT, and they'll get in touch with you and find out exactly how many copies you're looking for, and make sure that we get them to you as pronto as we can. So the next step is how we get started. I don't know about you. I chose this picture because it's kind of how it feels to me. I never know at home when this appears on my coffee table. I just wanted to watch Netflix, and I'm not quite sure how to get off what my daughter has left the television on, and then to skip the bit that my son set up yesterday by pressing all of the buttons on all of these remotes. I get really unsure about which one to pick up and then which button to press, about where do I start. So what I wanted to do was to let you know that we've done the work on that. What you don't need to do is to rely heavily on training. So the workshops for us, even the ones that I'll be running in your neck of the woods, the workshops are to get you interested and started, but they're not implementation. And I don't know about you, but as a principal, I made this mistake. I actually booked training for my school a couple of times around conduct, behaviour, and culture, and engagement and classroom management. And my staff in the school, they really enjoyed it. And a few times the presenters left with applause and some budget. And what I noticed was that 3 to 4 weeks later, not much had changed. There's a lag that comes after the PL, and it comes because we're relying too heavily on it. And the implementation of new ways of working culturally is really difficult for teachers. They take that practice really personally. They find change around practice almost sometimes a personal affront, and it takes a wider variety of supports and implementive levers in order for them to be able to make that shift. We think there's probably 10. So how you get started is to make sure that your approach to implementing this work has these 10 things. Yes, they will need high quality PL. Yes, they will also need in-class support. So they'll need to have people show up in their classrooms to do some of the modelling, because they want to be able to see that it works. They actually also want to be able to see that it's not easy. So they need someone who's vulnerable and brave enough to say, I can show up and show you how to do a learning circle, or I can show up and show you how to resolve conflict more quickly using a past, present, future framework. I can show up and show you how language can make a significant difference in your classroom, and it provides psychological safety for them to be able to step into having a go themselves. We can transition. We can have a bit of a Vygotsky approach where we have a gradual release of responsibility by doing a bit of co-teaching after that, and then we can get to the point where hopefully they're having a go themselves and providing feedback. We need to engage our parents in this, not in such a way that we get them from kind of, we want to practice this restorative way, but you're over here, and you're a long way away and I want to get you over here. We don't want that. What we want to do is put in place, as is suggested in number 0.7 here, a little comms plan that allows them to inch and to inch past what I often refer to as being a really important threshold, which is begrudging permission. You know, all right, I'll give you a go at this restorer crap you've been on about. We don't need any more than that, because at this point, if I can get you a little win, you'll do the rest of the work yourself. And that's a really important thing. So we need to be able to engage our parents. We need your leaders mentored on how they can be supported to build the culture that they're looking for. They need to have the right impetus for the right kind of questions and conversations. And they need to be really clear on the sort of culture that they're going to design to build. We need also an action plan. So, what this is about is trying to, as number 9 speaks to also, is about avoiding the resource, the lag, the 3 to 4 week lag that comes after professional learning, which means we need to drip feed people with a variety of different resources. Now, we want to be able to put those into a really simple action plan that people can access, and that you can find those resources so that you don't have to think about it every second day. And one of the things that we do is provide our partner schools with those resources. So if the reason that number 9 is in red is that if you want to see some of those resources, I'm really happy to send you through a couple of our articles on teacher practice. So we provide really simple articles that can inspire conversation at PLC and staff meeting level, year level, faculty level. They all have links to the AITSL standards. There's a major link and a 2 to 3 minor links. There are also some articles on cultural leadership for your executive teams, all linked to the AITSL principal standards. And there are things that we call staff meeting conversation starters, which are 3 to 5 minute videos, sadly for all of you, of me kind of sitting here and unpacking a small segment of this in 3 to 5 minutes with a provocation for discussion at the end of it. We tell all of our partner schools, we don't need you to allocate extra meetings for our work. We just want 5 minutes of every time people get together. So just put the word resourcing in your email if you'd like a bit of that. You'll need, parallel to that action plan, which is more of a back of house document, a front of house document, a public declaration. We, with our partners, call it an SEP, a student engagement plan. It's the one page. Get everyone on the same page. Here's the page. And if you'd like to have a look at one of those, then just put either SEP or public declaration in your email and we'll send that across to you as well. As I mentioned, part of getting the parents on board is a communications plan. We help our schools to do bizarre little things like hold a camera up and learn how to do a quick video of yourself that can engage people on socials. We provide newsletter blurbs. We provide letters for our classroom teachers to be able to use as term letters to communicate these practice intentions and inch them across the begrudging permission threshold. There'll need to be coaching for teachers, because we also know that teachers will have implementation barriers show up. And sometimes they're barriers that show up because of capacity. Some teachers struggle more than others. I don't know if it's your experience, but mine is across the continuum that of the teacher career continuum, that the teachers at both ends seem to absorb a lot of resource. The early career teachers really need a lot of help with sort of the how of teaching, and the slightly sometimes rusted on experienced teachers, where experience is high but enthusiasm perhaps not so, need a lot of conversations about why. And so we need to be able to gear ourselves to be able to handle those conversations with some sophistication, and you need to be able to measure your progress through a variety of different tools that allow leaders to feel that they're getting somewhere, that allow parents to feel that they're more connected and supportive of the school, and that allow young people to be able to feel that school's a place where they belong, and that their own social outcomes have been enhanced by the work that you're doing in the school. And we actually provide all of those tools. And you have an opportunity, if you would like to chat about that, to not miss out. I mentioned at the start that for WA and for New South Wales schools, there's a cost associated with not doing this work. For schools in other states, I think there's a cost associated with not getting ahead of the game that's coming for you. And that cost initially is around compliance. But I also think that there's a cost associated with us not being able to work effectively in our own moral purpose for why we got into education in the first place. What does improving whole school behaviour do for you? What's in it for you? It allows you to feel the two big benefits of working restoratively that have been mine as a school leader for countless years. One is that I feel more effective. I feel that young people make more progress academically and socially in my company when I practice using this RP 2.0 methodology. That's good. And the second thing that it does is it makes me less stressed, because I genuinely believe that the practices I'm deploying are not only effective, but they are close, to my own moral purpose for working in education. They allow me to be fulfilled by my work and to not feel like I went home every day doing things that kind of have me saying this is not what I signed up for. The cost is not just a compliance cost for your school. The cost is that we're going to have our soul diminished. We're going to lose, and I'm sorry to speak so darkly, because I actually think the flip of that is that we get to get our soul nourished. We get to bring the joy back into our work by working on our moral purpose through something that our governments are going to ask us to do anyway. And if you would like a yak about that, the so what, now what answer, now that you've sat through 50 minutes or so of me sort of spelling out the challenge that we have in front of us in terms of young people's schools history, is do you want to have a yak about it? And if you would like to have a chat about that, all you need to do in your email is write the word meet. Okay. And you can't sign up for a Real Schools partnership from the website. We gatekeep a little harder than that. We want to work with schools who share our bias for implementation, who share our bias for partnership, who share our collective understanding that PL isn't enough. And so if you're thinking maybe we could get Adam or his team to come and do some PL in your school, the answer is no. If you want to implement in your school, then we're all in. And to do that, we need to understand your school. And so we should meet, we should talk about that and find out about your school. The joy of stepping into this is that you can trust the support you're going to get. My team at Real Schools of expert facilitators, and in the videos at the start of the webinar today, you would have noticed that both videos spoke to Cassie. Cassie Katani is the expert facilitator that they're speaking to. She's a former school principal and she's a gun. She's an absolute superstar. Every one of our expert facilitators who provide the training, who get in the classrooms and do the modelling, the co-teaching and provide the feedback, who engage your parents, who provide the resources, who lead and mentor your leadership team, who coach your teachers, and who are on tap, on call for your school. Every one of them is a former successful principal and teacher. That's why the model works. That's why it stands up. We bring the content, we bring a successful model, and we bring a methodology that allows you to get the results you're looking for. You bring the context. Every single school in Australia is unique. In the overlap between the context and the content is some really bloody good implementation. And if you get the implementation right, student behaviour can improve. It really can. There's a better future ahead for your school if you're willing to have a yak about it. Thank you. What I'm going to do is, again, a little counterintuitive to the usual webinar, is that if you would like to use the chat box to make any comment or ask any question, I'm going to let the webinar kind of fizzle out, and I'll keep an eye on the attendance box as people leave the room. But you're short of that, if you haven't got a comment or a question to make in the chat box or the question box, I sometimes lose track of which one's actually working and which isn't. Then your day's done. Thanks so much for, if nothing else, providing a little bit of your time. I know how precious it is. As I say in the classics, go home and be happy. Thanks, folks.